Thanks to all who have joined us this evening. As a not-for-profit cultural institution, the McLean County Museum of History really needs your support. So if you're not a member or a donor to our institution, I would encourage you to do so because we offer a lot of programs such as this for free. I mean, our mission is really focused on education, and this is part and parcel of what we do. Okay, we got a lot of ground to cover today, and I don't want to take more than 45, 50 minutes, hopefully, here. As always, first, the disclaimer, I'm a local historical society librarian, of course, not an astronomer, not an amateur astronomer, nor a professional one. So let's keep that in mind. My interest here is in how local folk reacted to this incredible event in many ways. So this is not a science-driven lecture. So just be aware of that. Okay. Zarb Dewees, it's an odd name. He was an Alsatian newspaper editor who lived in Bloomington for a little while in the early 1870s. So this Zarb Dewees, while he was in Bloomington, realizing that the initial pioneer generation was passing away, decided to interview elderly, for the most part, pioneers. This is in the early 1870s, and then he put it all down into paper. The result was Good Old Times in McLean County, published in 1874, and it is a wealth of early settler stories. Sure, there's plenty of legend and lore, but there's also this is a volume rich with anecdotes that can be mined for further research. So, for example, in Good Old Times, one comes across topics such as the winter of deep snow, which was 1830-31, the sudden freeze of December 20th, 1836, all sorts of fascinating things. The difficulty of milling grain in the winter, encounters obviously with indigenous or native folk, the danger of fording swollen creeks and rivers in springtime. And then I kept coming across The Night the Stars Fell, and I thought, well, what exactly do we have here? I wanted to learn more. So I spent a fair amount of time at the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library a few years ago, both looking through Illinois newspaper microfilm and manuscripts for firsthand accounts of this meteor shower, or rather meteor storm, of 1833. And as a board member of the Illinois State Historical Society, I put out word through the organization's magazine and other means seeking primary source material, letters or diaries, recounting this event. And I had some success in that. Well, needless to say, it was one of the greatest natural light shows in recorded human history. During the pre-dawn hours of November 13th, 1833, the heavens lit up like a 4th of July sparkler as untold tens upon tens of thousands of meteors streaked through the darkened sky. The scene that unfolded simply beggars the imagination, with one observer calling it a canopy of living fire. That is the heavenly dome, a canopy of living fire, while another described it as a, quote, war of shooting stars. Early McLean County settler Robert Dickerson said it was like watching, quote, showers of fiery rain falling to the ground. Reliable accounts of the event boggle the mind. A.C. Twining of West Point, New York, for instance, estimated the rate of bright meteors at about 10,000 an hour, and that was a relatively conservative estimate, it appears. Okay, just had a little glitch there. Here we see a woodcut of what folks would have seen that night in 1833. This is from the Commercial Advertiser, a newspaper out of New York City. The fiery rain was visible throughout the eastern half of North America. A writer for the Baltimore Patriot newspaper compared the innumerable meteors to, quote, flakes of snow or drops of rain in the midst of a storm. It was quite simply, quote, one of the most grand and alarming spectacles which ever beamed upon the eye of man. The Charleston Mercury said this of The Night the Stars Fell, quote, one glance at this spectacle was worth 10 years of common life. One glance worth 10 years of your life. Others, though, greeted the spectacle with fear and panic, seeing not a magnificent spectacle of nature, but rather a sign of the end times. The night of meteors, it was said, quote, scared everybody to prayers. This woodcut, as I said, appeared in the Commercial Advertiser, and it would be reprinted in the Boston Evening Transcript, and other papers would run similar images in the weeks after this event. And newspapers did play an instrumental role in disseminating relatively accurate accounts of and information about the night the stars fell. Remember, at this time in 1833, there were only a few rail lines on the eastern seaboard, and the telegraph doesn't make its commercial debut until 1844. So newspapers were vital to communicating information between cities and towns. Before we move on to the next image, note that this depiction shows the meteors radiating from a single point in the sky, and that will be of interest later on. The Salt River Journal of Bowling Green, Missouri, a newspaper, said, quote, the most perfect master of language would fail of conveying to others a full picture of this extraordinary and uncommon appearance. And you see a reoccurring struggle among people who witnessed the event, the inability of language to paint an adequate picture, to do justice to this night of nights. Many believe the stars were literally falling from the sky, or at least visually speaking, it appeared that way. And afterward, the event became known as the night the stars fell. Here we see two newspaper woodcuts similar to the one we just saw, including one from the December 7th, 1833 Sangamo Journal, which was an early Springfield, Illinois newspaper. This Springfield paper had previously related a lengthy dispatch from the Cincinnati Gazette, another newspaper. These newspapers were trading stories quite freely. So the Sangamo Journal was citing the Cincinnati Gazette, which noted the similarity of this meteor storm in 1833 to one witnessed in November 1799 by Andrew Ellicott, who was on a US survey mission off the coast of Florida near Key Largo. So again, in 1799, newspapers were already, in 1833, newspapers were already reporting of this similar meteor storm in 1799. And I'll have more on Ellicott and the 1799 meteor storm and its relation to the one we're talking about in a second. This woodcutter lithograph depicts the meteor storm as seen at Niagara Falls, New York, from the periodical Mechanics magazine, November 1833. The illustration was made by an editor named Pickering, who it was said witnessed the scene. And there are several other early illustrations of the meteor storm over Niagara Falls. Okay, before we go further, we really need to set the stage locally. What was happening in McLean County back in 1833, right? Well, first off, we need to know that Euro-American or white settlement, permanent settlement to this stretch of central Illinois, to what becomes McLean County, really begins in the early 1820s. And McLean County itself wasn't established by the state legislature until late 1830. So I'm showing this map because this gives you a rough sense of the landscape pre-contact, that is prior to the arrival of Euro-Americans. And we're seeing what will become McLean County, relatively unspoiled by commercial development, which will happen soon. This map was created in the 1850s, but it's based on the original federal surveys and survey notes from the early 1820s. So this is an incredibly detailed, rich map of what McLean County was before the arrival of white settlement in the early 1820s. And I'm using my cursor, and I hope you can see the cursor. This is Blooming Grove. So these outlines here in green are showing timbered tracks. So although we're on the edge of the East Central Grand Prairie, which was a remarkable landscape, right? One of the more magnificent biomes in North America, all lost, right? Very little, if any, survives today. So we are on the Grand Prairie. So about 90% of present-day McLean County was in tallgrass prairie or intermittent wetland prairie. but about 10% was in timber, either wooded groves or larger timbered tracts. So again, Blooming Grove. If we're to take Interstate 55 south of Springfield and St. Louis, we'd encounter Funk's Grove right here. Here's Twin Grove and Dry Grove. Over here is Old Town Timber, named for a Kickapoo settlement. Here is the Mackinac Timber, following the water course of the Mackinac. So I just wanted to set the stage for us before we move on, to get a sense of what McLean County was like in the 1820s and early 1830s. So I've just enlarged the map we were looking at, and here we see the square. This will become Bloomington Township. This is 6,600 acre Blooming Grove, and downtown Bloomington will be situated in section six of Bloomington Township, which I am highlighting right here. So downtown Bloomington exists right here. Front Street, apologies. Front Street is so named because it is on the northern front of the timber, Blooming Grove timber, and the frontage of the Grand Prairie that continues on northward from there. So we're getting a sense again of what this area was like around the time of the night the stars fell. Euro-American settlement was certainly genocidal when it came to the removal of native people, but it was also a bureaucratic organizational triumph accomplished by overlaying the natural landscape with a geometric grid. And that's what we're seeing right here, So this is section 4 of what will become Blooming Grove or Bloomington Township. Bloomington doesn't get its first town lots staked out and sold until the summer of 1831. So Bloomington population that year, 1831, is only 80 souls. 3 years later, in 1834, an early census of the town of Bloomington indicates that there are about 180 residents. So we're talking about a sparsely settled area in 1833, 3 or so years after the establishment of the county. So this is a wonderful map. We're looking at McLean County in 1830. Again, we can kind of see the outlines of the wooded groves. Here's Old Town Timber, here's Blooming Grove. But notice there are black squares. Those are sections, 640 acres usually, that have been taken off public domain. That means the US government no longer owns this land. It is now held in private hands, either by a speculator or by a settler, perhaps. So what we're noticing here is that in 1830, and even when we jump ahead in 1835, most of the land no longer in public domain, land that had been sold by the federal government, again, to speculators or individuals, that land hewed closely to timber tracts or clung to the edge of those timbered tracts. So we're seeing the early settlement right here develop in McLean County. These maps come from Arthur Weldon Watterson's doctoral dissertation, University of Chicago dissertation. Of course, Arthur Weldon Watterson will come to Illinois State Normal University and teach, and he will be the namesake of Watterson Towers. Here's a partial of an 1834 map made to kind of make this area attractive primarily to German immigrants. At the time of its creation, many folks might not know this, McLean County had roughly 2,000 square miles when it was established by the state legislature in late 1830. 2,000 square miles, or almost twice the 1,173 square miles that McLean County is today. But McLean County would be chipped away by the subsequent establishment of Livingston and Woodford counties to the north and Logan and DeWitt counties to the south. And until the arrival of steam locomotives and railroads in 1853, landlocked Bloomington and McLean County will really, the growth and the economic development will be slow growing. In a better world, we would have recollections of the night the stars fell from the Kickapoo and perhaps other native people living in central Illinois. But of course, by 1833, the American government, with the enthusiastic support of settlers, had all but completed the forcible removal of the remaining Kickapoo, and such. History is a stain that we just cannot ignore any longer. Sometimes what's missing in a story is as important or even more important as what's not missing, right? And the fact that we lack recollections from Native people, I think, is a story that deserves some attention, right? The museum recognizes that the land we call McLean County is the ancestral land of many Native groups, beginning all the way back with the Paleo Indians 12,000 years ago, who followed the retreating glaciers to hunt mastodon and other megafauna. And those that came after the Paleo Indians included the mound building Mississippians and others. By the early 18th century, the resilient Kickapoo began filling the vacuum left by the cultural disintegration and collapse of the Illinois people. On July 30th, 1819, the Kickapoo ceded claims to virtually the entire central section of Illinois. This transformation of a landscape and its people into real estate entailed a depressingly endless series of treaties that provided legal sanction to wresting away land from indigenous people. A supplementary agreement included the guarantee of Missouri Territory land on the Osage River in Missouri. A substantial number of Kickapoo, though, repudiated the treaties and remained in Illinois, primarily in McLean County and present-day southern Livingston County, likely into 1834 or so, though we have no detailed accounting of their situation, let alone eyewitness accounts of the great 1833 Meteor Storm. So the Kickapoo were given land along the Osage River in Missouri, but land-hungry whites and Native people indigenous to the area made such an arrangement untenable. So that led to the October 24th, 1832 Treaty of Castor Hill, with a large number of Kickapoo agreeing to remove from Missouri to Kansas. And we're seeing that illustrated here in this map. In May of the following year, 1833, about 400 Kickapoo and more than 100 Potawatomi arrived from southwest Missouri to a site some 5 miles north of Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. This not all that far from where the Kickapoo would eventually end up in Brown County, Kansas. So I'm going through all of this because I think it's necessary, because I need to place the Kickapoo in November 1833. I think that's important. And we're going to end up with a story about the night the stars fall relating to Native people as well. But note here we have Kickapoo in Oklahoma, in Texas, and in Mexico. Because more culturally conservative Kickapoo being menaced in Kansas then began to move ever southward, establishing a presence which remains today in Oklahoma, a presence on the Rio Grande in Texas, and across the Rio Grande in the nation state of Mexico. So the Kickapoo are with us today in Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, and Mexico. And the farther south you get, the more culturally conservative the Kickapoo remain today. They are truly a resilient and remarkable people. So on November 8th, 1833, just a few days before the night the stars fell, a U.S. Commissioner of Indian Tribes, Henry Ellsworth, who's quite a well-known figure in the first half of the 19th century when it comes to Indian affairs, and he becomes the first director of the Patent Office. So this Henry Ellsworth convenes a council of all the various natives people removed from their homelands in Illinois and elsewhere. This is just outside of Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, right? So there's the Delaware, the Ottawa, the Peoria, the Kaskaskia, the Sac, the Kickapoo, and many others. This big grand council. The day after the night the stars fell, it was said that the Indian commissioner, this Ellsworth, told the assembled native delegations that the meteor storm demonstrated the Great Spirit's approval of the recently concluded treaty. And one history of that reads, quote, his statement apparently amused some of the more sophisticated delegates, but some of the delegates took it very seriously. So this account is the only one I've so far come across relating to the Kickapoo and the night the stars fell. So we'll leave the Kickapoo of the Central Illinois Prairie Lands here outside of Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, forcibly removed, in Campton, Kansas, and strangers in a strange land. If we shift our focus to the northern Great Plains, and don't worry, we're going to get back to central Illinois in a second, we have several wonderful examples of Native people and their encounter with the night the stars fell. And I just wanted to share a few of them. This is an object that speaks to the oral culture and history keeping of the Native people of the northern Great Plains. Winter counts consist of a series of pictographs, each one representing the passage of time between a first snowfall and the following year's first snowfall. The winter count shown here comes from the Sioux Yanktonai community. The years begin in the center and spiral outwards. This image appeared in the 4th annual report of the Bureau of Ethnology through the Smithsonian Institution. The Bureau of Ethnology at this time was directed by John Wesley Powell, formerly of Normal, Illinois, of course. What we're seeing here is an artist's reconstruction, though, made by projecting a photographic image of an older muslin version onto a drawing of a buffalo hide and tracing over the figures. So in effect, we're seeing an artful 19th century copy, if you will, of an older muslin version, cloth version of this winter count. And this winter count does include 1833, 1834, and you're seeing the night the stars fell depicted there and the lower right. The dark shape, of course, is the moon, and the circles surrounding the moon are stars falling, are what those folks would have seen at the time. The National Anthropological Archives of the Smithsonian does not hold an original copy of what's known as the lone dog, this winter count. Only photographs of the cloth copy, which were first obtained by a U.S. infantry lieutenant stationed in the Dakota Territory back in the 1870s. So it's kind of a convoluted story, but here we have Native people recording their impressions of the night the stars fell, the meteor shower of 1833. Other northern plains pictographs of the night the stars fell, we have other examples from left to right. Here we see Baptiste Good. He was a Brule Sioux, and they dubbed 1833-34 as the Storms of Stars Winter. The second, or the middle one, is Cloud Shield, the year it rained stars, and it comes from Cloud Shield, an American horse, a Sioux chief. And right, we see the Swan Winter Count. Quote, Dakotas witnessed magnificent meteoric showers, much terrified. So those are stick figures or Sioux, terrified, prostrate on the ground as the meteor shower continues above them. The Swan was a Minneconjou, a northern band of the Lakota who had settled primarily on Cheyenne River Reservation land. So now we will return to central Illinois. Early McLean County settler John Dawson was 14 years old when he witnessed the night the stars fell. Seen here are his parents. The family settled in Blooming Grove, just south of present-day Bloomington, way back in the spring of 1822, right? Very early settlers. The Dawson's place by 1833 was some 15 miles east of Bloomington along a well-traveled road. Dawson's father, also named John, quote, entertained all travelers who cared to stop. And on the night of November 13th, 1833, there were around 40 people in the Pioneer home. And this is the younger John Dawson's recollection. Quote, Mother called me and the other children about midnight, I think. And this was a recollection from 1899. Mother called me and the other children about midnight, I think. The stars were then falling very quickly, and I know of nothing better to which I can compare it to than a snowstorm. It was a scene of unsurpassed gorgeousness and brilliancy. The people who were stopping at my father's house were thrown into a great panic, Dawson added. The women were screaming and praying. Some of the men were cursing and crying that the day of judgment was at hand. They were crazy with fright and acted like a crowd of maniacs. One big fellow, I don't know who he was, retained his sense and endeavored to quiet the frightened people. He told them that they were crazy and acted like a lot of fools. After a while, he succeeded in calming them to a certain extent, but few could sleep anymore that night. McLean County pioneer William Noble, who was 15 at the time, was there for the night the stars fell. Years later, he talked to Zarb Dewees, the compiler of Good Old Times in McLean County. Quote, he felt no fear on account of this wonderful phenomenon, Dewees recounted of Noble. But the next morning when he went to the mill, he met so many persons who were frightened by the meteors that he began to be frightened himself. Some people were made crazy with fear. And it's no stretch to believe that this meteor storm, of course, figured in the intense religious fervor of the age. Here's the book of Revelation, chapter 6, verses 12 through 14. And I picked a King James Bible in our Bible collection here in the archives of the McLean County Museum of History. And the stars fell unto the earth, even as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs when she is shaken of a mighty wind. And even semi-illiterate pioneers would have been quite familiar with the King James Bible and would have been familiar with these verses, right? So again, it's no stretch to believe that this meteor storm played some role in the religious fervor of the period. And there are you could pull other verses from the Bible of the gospel according to St. Matthew 24:9. Jesus is asked by one of his disciples, what shall be the sign of thy coming and the end of the world? And Jesus replies, immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from the heaven, and the powers of heaven shall be shaken. Abraham W. Carlock, another McLean County settler and eyewitness, was at that time in the Fox River country up north in northern Illinois. And the meteors fell at all points of the compass and lit up the whole heavens, it was remembered. Of course, this phenomenon alarmed the superstitious, as such things always do, continued the account in Good Old Times in McLean County. And many people thought the millennium was surely at hand. One of my favorite recollections doesn't come from Central Illinois, but from Clark County, Kentucky, and a judge who recounted that, quote, old feuds were reconciled, enemies were made friends, for they expected that at any moment to hear the last trumpet sound and be called to an account of their doings here below. It is said that James Rhodes thought the world was coming to an end, and he arose and began reading his Bible. He was 20 at the time, and he would become a Methodist minister and move to Iowa in 1855. Another eyewitness. Seventh-day Adventists hold that great cosmic signs like natural disasters or meteor storms are the fulfillment of biblical prophecy and a signal that the approaching second coming is around the corner. The 1755 Lisbon earthquake, the so-called dark day of 1780 in England, and the 1833 night the stars fell have all been interpreted by Seventh-day Adventists as a fulfillment of biblical prophecy. And here we're seeing the depiction of the night the stars fell from a work called On the Books of Daniel and the Revelation, written by Seventh-day Adventist author, minister, educator, and theologian Uriah Smith. And it's really, this is a classic text on the faith's end time beliefs. And we have Seventh-day Adventists to thank for several well-known images of the 1833 meteor storm because they had an interest in that. Okay, so in 1833, meteors were pondered and they were feared, but they were really not understood. One theory held that meteors were electrical disturbances in the upper atmosphere, akin to lightning. Others suppose that they were tiny terrestrial comets revolving not around the sun, but the earth. Others still believe that meteors had something to do with the exhalation of volcanoes, while others pointed to changes in weather. And that's why early, even scientific observations of meteor storms and showers often include things like temperature, wind speed, humidity, things that have absolutely nothing to do, we know now, to do with what's happening. But back then, of course, folks just did not know that. So enter this young man, 42-year-old professor of mathematics and natural philosophy at Yale College, Denison Olmsted, who awoke on the night the stars fell not far from the Yale campus and remained transfixed until daylight, all the while carefully observing the following, taking notes, right, like a good scientist would. And these are the things he observed on the night the stars fell. As most folks were prostrate on the ground in prayers or standing in complete awe with their jaws open wide, Olmsted was taking notes. 1, the meteors all radiated from the constellation Leo, the lion, from the curve of the sickle-shaped pattern of stars representing the lion's mane. So that was one thing he saw. 2, through the blizzard of, quote, stars, he could see Venus and Saturn, the planets, as well as many brighter stars and constellations. 3rd, the point of apparent radiation where the meteors were spitting out of shifted through the night and thus still radiated from Leo as the constellation was moving across the nighttime sky with Earth's revolution. Clearly, ipso facto, Olmsted understood even that night these falling stars were not traveling with the Earth, but rather must be coming from space beyond the planet. 4th, Olmsted was also aware of a detailed description of a meteor storm 34 years earlier of similar frequency and duration. This account came from Alexander von Humboldt, a 30-year-old German naturalist who was off the coast of Venezuela on November 12, 1799. So that's the second observation I've mentioned of a meteor storm in 1799. So Olmsted handed off his impressions that night to the New Haven Daily Herald newspaper that morning, which published his report the very same day. Olmsted asked for firsthand accounts and related information from other observers, and thus unwittingly became a clearinghouse for all things related to this event. After collecting reports from across North America, his findings appeared in the American Journal of Science and Arts, playing a major role in the scientific debate about the event. Thus, in many ways, the great 1833 meteor storm represents the beginning for the end of meteors classified as a part of meteorology, that is the weather, and a recognition that meteors were instead part of the field of astronomy. This woodcut shows the sailing vessel carrying Andrew Ellicott, that US surveyor mentioned earlier, who wrote a detailed description of the 1799 meteor storm. Remember that dispatch from the Sangamo Journal of Springfield that I mentioned early in the talk. So we have 2 accounts of a spectacular meteor storm that occurred on November 12, 1799, one from US surveyor Andrew Ellicott off the Florida coast, and the other from German naturalist Alexander von Humboldt off Venezuela, known to Olmsted and others. The fact that the 1799 meteor storm occurred at the same time of year as the one in 1833 did not escape notice of some observers, and I'll return to that in a second. Today, we know that a meteor shower, spoiler alert, occurs when the Earth, which travels around the sun at more than 67,000 miles an hour, some of you might not know that you're traveling that fast right now, passes through a stream of ice and dust particles left in a comet's wake. Comets, of course, are often described as dirty snowballs, and they shed a stream of solid particles known as meteoroids as they warm up approaching the sun, as they orbit the sun just as the planets do. These particles shedded by a comet, it's really silicate dust and tiny rocks, usually no bigger than a grain of sand or a pebble, that ignite and vaporize in the Earth's atmosphere, oftentimes leaving a fleeting streak of light across the nighttime sky. When these particles hit Earth's atmosphere, they incandense, that is, glow with heat, as they speed through the atmosphere all aglow. And as they speed through the atmosphere all aglow, they ionize the air, causing the air itself to luminesce. So what you're seeing in that streak of light is really ionized air, which makes it in some ways even more interesting. A typical meteor shower can deposit upwards of 12 to 13 tons of particles in the Earth's atmosphere. The larger meteoroids measure no more than 10 millimeters across and have a mass of about 0.5 gram. So we're talking about very tiny things. They're misleadingly, of course, called shooting or falling stars. And there are other seasonal meteor showers, including the Lenoids, created by the debris from Comet Thatcher, which is in April, and the more famous Perseids, which occur in August. And the Perseids originate from space debris, courtesy of Comet Swift-Tuttle. And there are others as well. So we have meteoroid, meteor, and meteorite. As mentioned, meteoroids are small, rocky, or metallic bodies in outer space. Meteoroids are significantly smaller than asteroids. A meteor, that's the flash of light in the night sky when a chunk of interplanetary debris burns up as it passes through our atmosphere. And then a meteorite is any part of an asteroid that survives the fall through the atmosphere, our atmosphere, and lands on Earth. So to summarize and simplify, a meteoroid is something in space, a meteor is something burning up in our atmosphere, and a meteorite is something that's landed on Earth. The following 2 slides come courtesy of Nagoya University in Japan, because I just found them good for what I needed to do. So thank you, Nagoya University. On November 13th, 1833, the Earth crossed Comet Tempel-Tuttle's debris stream. The comet itself wasn't discovered for more than 30 years after the night the stars fell. The comet having been discovered twice independently, once in 1865 and then again a year later in 1866 by Ernest Tempel and then Horace Tuttle, hence Tempel-Tuttle, the name for the comet. So for us, the mystery of the 1833 event is solved. Debris from the comet Tempel-Tuttle, as the Earth then passes through that debris field, and those little meteoroids then burn up in the Earth's atmosphere, creating a spectacular meteor storm. The comet's elliptical orbit takes it around the sun every 33 years. It extends as far out as Uranus. Tempel-Tuttle last reached its closest approach to the sun in 1998, and it will do so again in 2031. By the way, if you're taking notes at home, Tempel-Tuttle is a relatively small comet. Its nucleus measures about 2.24 miles. The meteor shower usually peaks with the Earth's first pass through a fresh, undisturbed debris stream. The 1833 meteor storm, for instance, was the result of passing through the 1800 stream. That said, it's complicated in that these debris streams have lives, or rather orbits of their own, continuing in space for hundreds of years. The increase in activity in 2001, 2002, those were both good years for meteor showers from Tempel-Tuttle. For example, those in 2001 and 2002 were the result of passing through the dust trails or pockets of debris from 1767 and 1866, respectively. And it appears that the Earth will not encounter any dense clouds of debris until 2099. And do not ask me to explain how you come up with these calculations. If you're adjusting for the gravitation of planets and the sun and all sorts of things, I can't imagine how they're able to do this to predict the meteor storms from year to year, or meteor shows. The last and truly spectacular Leonid storm came in 1966. Observers in the American Southwest reported seeing 40 to 50 meteors per second, or about 2,400 to 3,000 per minute during a span of 15 minutes. the morning of November 17th, 1966. Since these meteors from Temple-Tuttle comet appear to come from the region of space occupied by the constellation Leo the Lion, the annual shower is known as the Leonids. The term Leonids is actually kind of a pidgin mix of Greek and Latin, so it's a faux term, a faux word in a way. Regulus is the brightest star of this constellation, and it dots a backwards question mark of stars that comprise the sickle. The Leonids will radiate from this area of the sky. The radiant point is, of course, an optical illusion. Meteors move on parallel paths, so from a far distance, it appears as if they all emanate from the same point, known as the radiant. But if you're confused, have you ever looked down railroad tracks? You get that same view, if you will. This year, the Leonid meteor shower will peak on the night of November 17th and 18th, which is a Wednesday turning into a Thursday. Unfortunately, the problem is we'll have a bright waxing gibbous or nearly full moon, about 99% illuminated that night. But fortunately, most meteors should appear in the hour or so before dawn, by which time the moon will have set. So hopefully we'll see at least a modest shower of 10 to 15 meteors an hour at its peak. We can only hope. What makes a meteor shower a meteor storm, you might ask? About 1,000 meteors an hour makes it a storm. As they say, in most years, the lion whimpers rather than roars, but one or two bright meteors are enough to make one's night. I've been out there for the Leonids, and believe me, one or two meteors is special. Let's say goodbye to Denison Olmsted, the father of meteor science, 27 years, depicted here after the night the stars fell, and needing a brush, clearly. Joseph Harvey Waggoner was 13 years old and living in eastern Pennsylvania when he witnessed the night the stars fell. As an adult, the Baptist Waggoner converted to Seventh-day Adventist and became a minister. He approached Carl Joslin to depict what he, Waggoner, had seen that night 54 years earlier. Waggoner then called Joslin's subsequent depiction, quote, the best idea of the actual scene of all the representations that I ever saw. And this, in fact, is the most widely circulated image related to the night the stars fell, and generally regarded as relatively accurate for what folks had seen. And there's two enlargements from the previous image. And here's religious illustrator R.M. Eldridge's depiction, which comes from Bible Readings for the Home from 1947, another Seventh-day Adventist tinged publication. Let's look briefly at how the 1833 meteor storm lived on in popular culture. Here's Carl Carmer, Carmer's nonfiction work, Stars Fell on Alabama. Carmer was born in New York State, earned a master's from Harvard, and then, beginning in 1927, taught for 6 years in Tuscaloosa at the University of Alabama. He was an author of novels and nonfiction works, but was best known for writing about American myths, folklore, and tales, and Stars Fell on Alabama is his travelogue of sorts, as he spends time traveling around the state of Alabama. And the book's title, of course, is a reference to the 1833 Leonids. Carmer's book seems to be the source of Stars Fell on Alabama, a 1934 jazz standard composed by Frank Perkins with music by Mitchell Paris. Those that have performed this number include Ella Fitzgerald, Louis Armstrong, Jack Teagarden, Billie Holiday, Sinatra, Dean Martin, Doris Day. The list goes on and on and on. In fact, speaking of Fitzgerald and Armstrong, here are two of the greatest artists, right, of the 20th century. Here to sing Irving Berlin's Isn't This a Lovely Day? And on the B side, we have Ira and George Gershwin's A Foggy Day, Hoagie Carmichael's The Nearness of You, and of course, Parrish and Perkins' Stars Fell on Alabama. And if that wasn't enough, they're accompanied the whole time by the Oscar Peterson quartet. How about that? Stars Fell in Alabama is the unofficial anthem of the Marching Southerners, the marching band of Jacksonville State University in Alabama. And then in 2002, the phrase Stars Fell in Alabama was added to the Alabama license plate, only to be replaced in 2009 by, you can probably guess it, Sweet Home Alabama, a reference to the 1970s Southern rock anthem by Alabama-based Leonid Skinner. And yes, I stumbled across a B or perhaps C level rom-com that came out earlier this year called Stars Fell on Alabama. And I know everybody out there wants a plot summary, right? So here it is. Successful Hollywood agent Bryce Dixon, that's the guy, returns to Alabama for the first time in 15 years for his high school reunion, only to learn, horror of horrors, that he's the only one of his friends who isn't married or with children. So of course, the only right thing for him to do is to convince one of the Hollywood clients, that would be starlet Madison Bell, the woman on the right, to pretend to be his girlfriend. I'm not making this up, but Bryce is going to learn that there's more to life than seven-figure deals and coldly calculating careers, right? We know what's going to happen. He's also going to find romance might be a little closer than he thinks. What I like best about this is that the Stars Fell on Alabama rom-com was actually filmed in Beaufort and Bluffton, South Carolina. How about that? Okay, I'm running a little long, but not too long, and I'm going to end up with three unique, fascinating, remarkable Americans that really speak to this nation and all it has to offer, both for good and bad, right? So we're going to look at three. The first person up would be Joseph Smith. So for Latter-day Saints, Mormons, November 13th, 1833 was, quote, fulfillment of a prophecy made by their leader, Joseph Smith. And we have an account by Philo Dibble. Philo Dibble was an early convert to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and he recalls, quote, on one occasion, Joseph Smith, that is the founder of the faith, was preaching in Kirtland, Ohio, sometime in the fall of 1833. Quite a number of persons were present who did not belong to the church, and one man, more bitter and skeptical than the others, made note with pencil and paper of a prophecy uttered on that occasion, whereupon Joseph said that 40 days shall not pass and the stars shall fall from the heaven. So the skeptic kept his note, and after 39 days, taunted two Mormons that the prophecy of Joseph Smith remained unfulfilled. That is, he had said that 40 days shall not pass and the stars shall fall from the heaven. And this was 39 days later. And he said, what's up with this? And he condemned Joseph Smith for being a false prophet. But of course, the 40th day turned out to be November 13th, according to Philo Dibble. And as the, quote, whole heavens were lit up with the falling meteors, the skeptic, quote, turned pale as death and spoke not a word. So the night the stars fell fits into Mormon theology. The second American would be Frederick Douglass. This is an 1855 engraving. On the night of November 12th and 13th, 1833, Douglass was a 14-year-old enslaved person, 15 years old. We don't really know, he doesn't know how old he was because he doesn't know his birthday, right? One of the tragedies there. But he was an enslaved person, young boy in Talbot County, Maryland. Frederick Douglass was there for the night the stars fell. And this is what he remembers, quote, I witnessed this gorgeous spectacle and was awestruck. The air seemed filled with bright descending messengers from the sky. I was not without the suggestion at that moment that it might be the harbinger of the coming of the Son of Man. And in my then state of mind, I was prepared to hail him as my friend and deliverer. I had read that the stars shall fall from the heavens, and they were falling now. I was suffering very much in my mind, and I was looking away to heaven for the rest denied me here on earth. So that's an enslaved person looking to the night the stars fell for to be rescued, if you will, right? And last up on our list is this gentleman here. Of course, what would be a talk in Illinois without mention of Abraham Lincoln? But believe it or not, there's a really cool Night the Stars Fell story related to this guy. So I've got to tell it, right? Here we see the first known portrait of Lincoln, likely taken in 1846 in the Nicholas Shepard studio in Springfield. This Lincoln recollection, which by the way, comes from Walt Whitman. So we're kind of ending the program with Lincoln and Walt Whitman. How's that for you? So this recollection goes something like this. Again, coming from Walt Whitman, but about Abraham Lincoln. During the dark days of the Civil War, Lincoln received a delegation of bank presidents, presumably at the White House. And after much talk of business and finance, one of these bank presidents asked if Lincoln was losing faith in the Union's ability to survive intact. That is, there was a very real fear that the supposed permanence of the nation, the Union, was coming to an end. The war looked bad from the Union perspective as these bankers were meeting Abraham Lincoln during the dark days of the Civil War. Would the Union survive, they asked. Now, according to Walt Whitman's recollection, Lincoln responds thusly. When I was a young man in Illinois, this is Lincoln, I boarded for a time with a deacon of the Cumberland Presbyterian Church. One night I was roused from my sleep by a rap at the door, and I heard the deacon's voice exclaiming, "Arise, Abraham, arise, the day of judgment has come." I sprang from my bed and rushed to the window and saw the stars falling in great showers. But looking back of them in the heavens, I saw all the grand old constellations with which I was so well acquainted, fixed and true in their places. Gentlemen, Lincoln told the gathered bankers, the world did not come to an end then, nor will the Union come to an end now. So that's the story. So Lincoln sees the fiery rain, the descending meteors, but sees the constellations fixed behind that. And he uses that as a metaphor for the Union. Is this story true? As we like to say at the museum, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. No, we don't say that. But Lincoln, in fact, was lodging with Henry Onstott, a Presbyterian deacon, at the time of the meteor shower when he was living in New Salem. So that certainly fits. The New Salem of today is, of course, a recreation built during the Great Depression by the WPA, but cabin locations are accurate for the most part. So upon entering the recreated New Salem from the visitor center, the Onstott cabin and Cooper shop are the first cabins to the visitor's right. Onstott himself would later move to Petersburg, the seat of Menard County, and build a home in Cooperage on Main Street. So the next time you go to New Salem, stop at the Onstott cabin in Cooperage and try to remember Lincoln looking up into the heavens on the night the stars fell. That's kind of a cool story. We have in our museum archives really a riveting two-page reminiscence by Twin City attorney Dwayne Yockey of the Leonid's meteor shower of 2001. About a half an hour ago, I mentioned that the 2001 Leonid's was pretty spectacular. Dwayne's also an amateur astronomer and husband of museum board member Carolyn Yockey. So anyway, the problem was that night, and I'm basing this on Dwayne's recollection, which is in our archives. The problem was that night, the Leonids of November 2001, was that by after midnight, cloudy skies had blotted out the nighttime sky. So what was Dwayne to do? He jumped in his car and raced eastward, chasing clear skies. And remarkably, he ended up all the way out by Turkey Run State Park in the state of Indiana, believe it or not. Finally, at long last, he stumbled across a clear patch of sky, and this is what he writes. So I'm reading from Dwayne's recollection. I quickly set up my lawn chair and sat back to view what I considered an awesome spectacle. I saw literally hundreds of meteors, I would say at least 1,000 between 3:30 and 5 a.m. Most were small streaks, but there were many larger ones, and a good 24, which flared brightly during their trek across the sky and left a luminescent trail for a good 5 minutes after they had disappeared. So that's pretty remarkable to me. I hope in my lifetime I could see anything remotely close to that. So in less than a month from now, on the night of November 17th, 18th, you want to get as far away from the uncivilizing effects of light pollution and hopefully get out in the cornfields and the soybean fields and gaze skyward, and who knows quite what we're going to see. And the postscript here then will be in 1879, 46 years after the 1833 Night the Stars Fell, the Leonids of 1833, the Pantograph published a local reminiscence. Quote, sometimes the shower would slacken for a moment or so, and then it would renew until the very heavens seemed to be ablaze. This unnamed eyewitness wrote, quote, but I am attempting to do what I promised myself I would not undertake, to describe a scene which no imagination can conceive, nor tongue or pen portray. So you folks have been very patient. I went a little long, but thank you for your support, and I hope you found this of interest.
Thank you, Bill, for such a fantastic program. Does anyone have any questions that they want to ask? You can drop them in the Q&A box. You can drop them in the chat box. We'd be very happy to answer any questions for you. You've stunned them into silence, Bill. Oh, so I can answer this question. Will we be able to see a rerun of this? Yes, we have been recording the program this evening, and it will be loaded on our YouTube page later this week. So keep an eye on the museum's Facebook page and also our YouTube channel, which I will find the link to our YouTube page and drop it in the chat box here in a couple minutes. So Dwayne Yaki was tuning in, Bill, and he dropped a comment in the chat box. Lunar eclipse November 19th at 3 a.m. may see some remnants of the Leonid during that dark period. So mark your calendars, everyone, for the 19th. Set your alarm clock to 3 a.m. Brew a cup of coffee to catch some of the Leonids that night. Daryl asks, my understanding is that this was a worldwide event. Was it?
Well, I probably should defer to the experts such as Dwayne, but my understanding is it was visible in the eastern United States, but meteor showers are not seen globally. They're only seen in certain large geographical swaths of the globe. That's my understanding.
A couple questions in the Q&A. Someone wants to know, do you have a bibliography of the research, I'm guessing pertaining to this program?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have any sort of typed out or bibliography, but folks are welcome to contact me and I could kind of steer them toward some sources. For example, on the Northern Great Plains winter counts, there's this wonderful work, The Years the Stars Fell, Lakota Winter Counts at the Smithsonian, which was published about 10 or 15 years ago, which I made use of. So there are primary and secondary sources I can steer folks to, absolutely.
Another question, do you have any record albums in the collection that include The Stars Fell on Alabama?
Yeah, unfortunately, no. We have a large sheet music collection with a lot of local sheet music, but I did check because I wanted to use a digital scan of one we have, but we do not have a copy of that song, no.
Another question, was Walt Whitman in attendance at the meeting Lincoln held with the bankers, or did he concoct this amazing story based on other accounts?
Yeah, I wish I knew the answer to that, and I honestly do not know. I need to pursue that a little bit farther. So an excellent question.
Any other questions? Don't see any right there. Well, as we wrap up, and feel free to ask some more questions while we wrap up, but we do have some fantastic programs coming up here at the museum the next couple weeks. Stop by the museum to see our Dia de los Muertos community ofrenda, which is on display until November 6th in the museum's first floor rotunda. If you missed the in-person Evergreen Cemetery Walk and wish to view it online, you can use the link that I just am dropping in the chat box to purchase your household ticket to see the walk on Teachable, our online platform. It will go live November 1st all the way through December 31st. And then we also have another program coming up on November 6th, another Zoom program with art historian and psychologist Felix Fiedler, who will be doing a part 2 to Bill's monument presentation we had back in the spring called Pitfalls and Promise to Public Art for McLean County Today. And you can sign up for that Zoom with the link that I'm also dropping in the chat box as well. And that's November 6th at 1 p.m. I hope that everyone has a good rest of your evening. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at another museum program soon. Take care and have a good evening, everyone.